Mr. Chu, let's cut straight to the chase. Is TikTok under the influence of the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator, we are a private business.
That was US Senator Tom Cotton grilling TikTok CEO Shao Tzu at a hearing on online child safety. Now, social media has taken a bashing in recent days. Mark Zuckerberg was another industry figure who was grilled. But with TikTok, whose parent company is ByteDance, things are somewhat different. But that's because of accusations that TikTok takes orders from the Chinese Communist Party. But while it's true that the CCP has a board seat at ByteDance, that only applies to the company's Chinese subsidiary, meaning debates around levels of political influence relating to TikTok remain speculative and often lacking evidence. This quote from US website The Hill puts it well. While there's no definitive evidence that TikTok is following Beijing's direct or even indirect orders, we simply do not know much about the inner workings of the company or any other social media company. After all, there is no US law that requires platforms to explain to users how they moderate content or use automated tools. There is also no law that forces platforms to be audited or subject to external scrutiny. Of course, that's a criticism that can be leveled at any social media giant, but at the very least, you can say there's a lack of transparency. However, definitive evidence doesn't seem to be an issue for Senator Tom Cotton, because when his claims of state influence were met with incredulity by Mr. Chu, he turned his attention to the CEO's nationality.
You said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Okay. Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Does Tom Cotton think that Singapore is a city in China? I genuinely don't know. By the way, Mr. Chu's CV is about as establishment as it gets. He was at University College London, he studied economics, then worked at Goldman Sachs. Then he goes to Harvard, interns at Facebook, his wife is Taiwanese American. He basically embodies the aspirations of millions of East Asians who work at the interface of East and West. Does the US really want to alienate these people and claim they're all potential spies? Maybe. Here's what Cotton said next.
Let me ask you some hopefully simple questions. You said earlier, in response to a question, that what happened at Tiananmen Square in June of 1989 was a massive protest. Did anything else happen in Tiananmen Square?
Yes, I think it's well documented. There was a massacre.
There was the indiscriminate slaughter of hundreds or thousands of Chinese citizens. Is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator, anyone, including, you can come into TikTok and talk about this topic.
I'm asking you,
or any topic that matters to you.
You are a worldly, cosmopolitan, well-educated man who's expressed many opinions on many topics. Is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Actually, Senator, I talk mainly about my company, and I'm here to talk about what TikTok does.
Yes or no? You're here to give testimony that is truthful and honest and complete.
Senator Cotton, massacre is a synonym for indiscriminate slaughter. And on the Uyghur question, from what I've seen, there is indeed a strong argument that it fits the UN definition of genocide, which in fact is more expansive than most people might initially think. That would also mean, for instance, the Irish famine was a genocide, as well as, in my view, what is happening in Gaza. What is more, a cultural genocide is distinct from a genocide as defined by the UN. But should your views on whether or not there is a genocide against the Uyghurs, a contentious topic, disqualify you from leading a business in the United States? After all, Jeffrey Sachs and Fareed Zakaria have pushed back against the claim in the past. And then there was this moment when US billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya said this on a podcast in 2022.
Nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? You bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard...
Wait, you're saying you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth, okay? Of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line.
Now, I think it's weird to disregard potential human rights abuses or claims of genocide like that, but it underscores my point. Does Mr. Chu now need to have certain opinions to operate as a CEO in the United States? And if so, Why was it different for that gentleman or Fareed Zakaria? Elon Musk said there were two sides to the story in Xinjiang. Does that mean he's now disqualified from running SpaceX? Now remember, this hearing was supposed to be about online child safety. So naturally, Tom Cotton also inferred that China has its sights on America's youth.
Well, let's turn to what TikTok, a tool of the Chinese Communist Party, is doing to America's youth. Does the name Mason Edens ring a bell?
Senator, you may have to give me more specifics if you don't mind.
Yeah, he was a 16-year-old Arkansan. After a breakup in 2022, he went on your platform and searched for things like inspirational quotes and positive affirmations. Instead, he was served up numerous videos glamorizing suicide until he killed himself by gun.
How do you respond to that? The causality between those two things is obviously highly contentious. I actually, obviously, researching the show, went to look online as to the reporting around this, who was making that causal claim. It was basically nobody. However, this is clearly a political intervention by Mr. Cotton. So inevitably, Joe Biden is involved in all of this. Here's how Tom Cotton wraps up his theory.
Has the Federal Trade Commission sued TikTok during the Biden administration?
Senator, I cannot talk about whether there's any
Are you currently being sued by the Federal Trade Commission?
Senator, I cannot talk about any potential lawsuits.
I didn't say potential, actual. Are you being sued by the Federal Trade Commission?
Senator, I think I've given you my answer. I cannot talk about.
No. Ms. Yacarino's company is being sued, I believe. Mr. Zuckerberg's company is being sued, I believe. Yet TikTok, the agent of the Chinese Communist Party, is not being sued by the Biden administration. We have a company that's a tool of the Chinese Communist Party that is poisoning the minds of America's children, in some cases driving them to suicide, and that at best the Biden administration is taking a pass on, at worst maybe in collaboration with. Thank you, Mr. Chu.
Michael, this is meant to be an opportunity for senators to ask questions, but it kind of sounds like Tom Cotton's made his mind up already.
I just like, thank you, Mr. Chu. I'm done with you now. I mean, it's sort of a sort of cultural symbol of multipolarity. This East Asian guy from Singapore just looking a lot more intelligent than the Republican senator questioning him. The United States having the most influential social media company in the country being owned by the Chinese is interesting. The Chinese wouldn't let the opposite happen. The Chinese were very sort of intentional in saying, we are not going to let these US companies dominate our sort of cultural sphere. They sort of saw how sort of the Arab Spring, etc., was sort of spread on Twitter. And I don't actually think it's completely unreasonable to think that the Chinese government are probably going to have some influence over TikTok. And, you've said this guy, very impressive, very articulate. You've said sort of he has the absolute sort of establishment CV that one would have to sort of be moving in sort of Western business elites. I mean, Singapore was basically sort of Western business elite sort of territory. You'd see why the Chinese would choose that kind of person to run TikTok, because it would give them some cover. Now, I don't know the evidence on this, but it seems not implausible to me. But if you wanted to make that point in a way that doesn't make America look just like some country of stupid people, like putting Tom Cotton in front of that very, very intelligent, very, very assured businessman, I don't think was great for the image of the United States.
I think that's fair. And look, your point about China not allowing Facebook, Instagram into China is a very valid one. Intriguingly, Chinese companies are now the biggest advertisers on Meta. You've got these Chinese versions of Amazon trying to now sell direct to the US consumer, obviously longer delivery times, but much cheaper. They're using huge amounts of money on advertising on Meta to reach that target audience. So there's a certain irony there. But like you say, I think what's of real interest to me here, Michael, is this is how, this is a stunning visual shorthand for multipolarity. There is actually a point to what Cotton is saying. You're right. However, the way his brain is working, the words coming out of his mouth, he just looks ridiculous. He doesn't seem to know the difference between China and Singapore. He doesn't seem capable of understanding that actually these are different countries, though they all look the same. You have ASEAN. It's a very different economic bloc to China. Huge economy. And I just think, Michael, for me, look, 2/3 of the world's growth is coming from the global south. The future is partly Asian, partly African because of demographics and political economy and industrial capacity in East Asia. China has the world's largest electric vehicles company, world leader in synthetic biology, solar panels, potentially AI at some point, digital payment systems. And it feels like this was a really important moment where you kind of see the West looking ridiculous. There was that great photo a couple of years ago. We had a Chinese trade delegation with the US, and on the US side, it was all old guys, and the Chinese were all, younger people, men and women. Interestingly enough, the median age isn't that different between the two countries. But again, it was a visual shorthand for power, not necessarily going to China, but certainly seeping away from the US. What do you make of that as well? And how do you think this kind of thing plays to the hundreds of millions of people in the global south, the billions of people who aren't Chinese, but who are aspirational, who want to get ahead, who think their countries have a lot to learn from the West, but at the same time think the West is increasingly ridiculous on things like foreign policy or McCarthyism 2.0?
You can tell a story which is very positive about the United States as to why they are happy to have a Chinese-owned sort of social media company be dominant in the United States, whereas the Chinese wouldn't allow TikTok or Facebook or whatever, which is that the Americans have the confidence that they think free speech, obviously, that speech is much freer in the United States than China. That they have the confidence to allow that and think that their system will still survive. There might be people in China thinking, well, it's about to collapse. You're about to re-elect Donald Trump. Don't be too complacent. But there is a positive story, and I think many people in the world do look at the United States, and the bits they see that are good are free speech, and more than anything, sort of wealth, but sort of the relative freedoms that people have. I think people look at that and they think that's great. Often sort of in surveys around the world, people do want to be more like the United States. But I think what's interesting about this moment is that no one wants to take lectures from the United States. So we've referred back to 2003 a few times on tonight's show, in the sense that sort of that was the last time when the USA, the UK, Israel, I think back then as well, were all just saying F you to the UN. They were saying, we are the international community and we can do what we want. Now, at the moment, it does seem like Israel is acting with impunity because of backing from the United States and from the UK and others. But I don't think anyone in the global south is fooled that this is the international community. I don't think they were before, sort of ethically or morally. I don't think in 2003 anyone was saying, oh, yes, yeah, so the United States and the UK, they are sort of the moral authority in the world. They didn't believe that. But I think people did think that's where power lies, right? You might not like it, but to be honest, sort of the community in the international sphere which has the capacity to act, that is, the US, the UK, et cetera, that is no longer the case. I don't think people are looking at sort of the United States and the United Kingdom sort of unconditional support for Israel and saying, well, that's just the way the world works. I think people are thinking this really might backfire for them because they are acting like they are within a unipolar world when they're not. And the rest of the world can see that. And these sort of interactions, I mean, I think the last time this gentleman spoke to the Senate, it sort of did go quite viral internationally because he was schooling those United States senators who looked kind of stupid. So I think this sort of cultural moment of a rising and confident East and a sort of complacent, because that's what Tom Cotton looked like there, right? He had the confidence of someone who knew what he was talking about, but everyone looking at him was like, this guy is an idiot, which I think, is in some ways an analogy for sort of a West which hasn't quite come to terms with the fact that it can't assume it's the boss anymore.
This is having real implications for us. If you look at 5G, Britain now has basically fake 5G. The speeds are no better than 4G because we gave Huawei the boot. So there are material implications to all of this. And of course, finally, it wasn't TikTok that young man killed himself with, Mr. Cotton. It was a gun. I think it says a lot about America's political culture that he wants to ban TikTok, but not firearms.